Hello class. In this video we're going to start to go over shadows and really using the transparency tools, and this one's just going to focus on the shadows for the plan where I have a little trick that will get us through 90 or more percent of these shadows pretty easily. There is going to be a shadow on the second floor for the deck that gets a little bit trickier, so most of the steps are going to be the same. I'll do all the ground shadows, but be sure to pay attention to the last step as well, where I'll have to talk about that. What I'm going to do is going to make sure all my layers are locked from the last time, and I'm going to come down to the ground layer and make a new layer right above ground and call it shadows. This way everything basically sits. I can draw on here, it'll be above the grass, but below everything else is perfectly the layer order I want it to be in. What I'm going to do is I'm going to take a shortcut. What I'm going to do is I'm going to use a trick or an effect to start to draw out what these shadows are without me really having to do a lot of work. And all I'm going to do is I already have a layer here. I'm going to go up to my wall layer, which is what the poche is, and if we recall way back from when we did it, we traced around the entirety of that object, and it's one solid big black piece. Well, I'm going to start by using that big solid big black piece as a base for my shadow, both for the first and second floor. So instead of redrawing it, I'm just going to unlock that wall layer. I'm going to take my black arrow, select on this guy, hold shift to also select the same location on the first floor, and go to edit copy. You could do Control C, of course. I'm done with that. I'm going to lock it. I'm going to come back to my shadow layer and be at my shadow layer. I'm going to go edit, paste in front, or Control F. And what that does is just took those objects and pasted them in the exact same position. If you do Control V, regular paste, it will paste it to the center of your screen. It'll come out somewhere over here. Watch when I do it here. If I do Control V, regular paste, it comes to the center of my screen. That doesn't help me. I could move it into place, but it's so much easier to do paste in front, and now it's right there. Now we don't see it because it's below all these other objects. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn these to pure black as my base for my shadow. Now, shadows don't necessarily have to be pure black. We'll talk about this at various times in class, but many rendering techniques use other colors than pure black for shadows. In fact, ours will have transparency, so of course it won't be a pure black in the end. But even so, you could make it a dark blue or purple or some other color. Could look quite interesting, but I'm going to keep with the basic for now and let you experiment with that. All right, so there we go. I still have no shadows. They're all well done. Well, I'm going to deselect everything. I'm going to come up here and just select my first floor base shadow. I'm going to go to Effects. I'm going to go to Distort Transform. I'm going to go to Transform. And it's going to pull up this dialog box. You won't, and I'll zoom in. I'll have to sort of set it before I can really show you what's going on. But with this, what I'm going to do is I'm not going to worry about scale. I'm going to go to Move, and I'm going to say Move over 0.02 inches, which is basically going to take this object and render it as if it's over just a tiny little bit. I'm also going to come over and do negative 0.02, so make it go downwards, and move it in that direction. And then I'm going to say, do 25 copies. Okay. Now, 25 basically means it's going to move it 0.02, 0.02 once, and then it's going to make another copy, move it again, make another copy, move it again, and so on and so forth. So I'm just going to say OK. And what you can see is what happened was it added this black shape here that looks like my house. It's coming out at 45 degrees like traditional architectural shadows would be if we're not casting with a computer software, and it looks like what this shadow might be. Now I need to add shadow to these elements over here. I'm not worried about that. I'll get that in a second. But let me show you what it really did. If I zoom way in, you can see there's these little steps, because that's each one of those is at 0.02 inches, and there's indeed 25 of them if you were to count them. And so what it does is it took that same image. It's all contained down in here, down in the floor plan within that green line. That's the real object, but it's rendering it these little steps out at 40, and since I set those numbers equal, it's putting them out at 45 degrees. It looks a little pixelated when you zoom way in, but when you zoom out, it looks like sort of the perfect orientation of shadows. Now, the one thing I do want to pay attention to, I don't care too much if your shadows go to the right or to the left, but I do want your shadows to go upwards, and that's because the sun can never be on the northern side. For plan, it means the sun rises over here, comes this way at noon, and sets over this way. That means the shadows always have to be cast to the upper end of the drawing. All right, so I want you to keep that in mind. I don't care if it's left or right, but it does need to go up like this. Basically, we're going to do the same thing for the chimney and this little deck here on the first floor plan. I'm going to draw, because the chimney would cast a rectangular shadow and it's not rectangle, I'm just going to draw a black rectangle. We don't see it because it's underneath everything. I'm going to go to effects. This time I could go to this transform and I'd have to reset everything, but if I go to this one right here, it'll take all my last settings and I can just say OK. Now I know you could also be saying, hey, the chimney should be taller, maybe the shadows should be taller, and you could do that, but keep in mind I'm casting these shadows as if the roof of this building is cut off, right? So the roof of the height of the chimney could also be cut off, but if you want to experiment with that, go ahead and change that. And I'm going to do the same thing for the deck. I'm just going to draw another rectangle right here, a black rectangle. We won't see it because it's underneath everything. I'm going to go to effects, transform. Now the only thing is this deck now is only like 6 inches off the ground if we looked at the elevation, so 25 copies would be too high. So I'm going to change that to 5 and say OK, and we have this. And we're going to do the second floor shadows in a second, and again there is a deck issue we have to deal with there. But before I move on, I'd have to say, well, these shadows are looking a little dark. And a great technique for changing shadows, you don't necessarily have to do it exactly this way because I'm going to have to make a change here in a second, but a basic technique is to use transparency. And so I can come over here, and this is my basic transparency button. If I come here to my opacity, if I lower this, what happens is the color becomes like it's partially so I can see through. So there's black, I'm seeing through it to the green, to the grass below, so it makes it this dark greenish color. It looks like a good shadow. Now I could do that for all my shadows, but we're going to run into a problem by doing it this way. So I'm going to go here and set these to also 40 degrees. And that is where these shadows overlap. They create a darker spot, right? So there's a darkish green here and a darkish green here that are the same color, but this little zone in here is darker because it's combining those transparencies in an overlay. That's not what shadows do, however. We want to get rid of that. All right. There are a couple ways of solving that problem in Illustrator, but the way I'm going to do it that I think is easiest is to use a really sort of special technique for transparency. So I'm going to actually undo all those steps and go back to pure black. That's not how we're going to change the transparencies. Instead, what we're going to do is I'm going to open up layers. All right, and I'm going to scroll down so I can see my shadow layer. See these little circles over here? I'm going to click on the one at my shadow layer, and you'll notice it selects everything. Now I'm going to change my transparency, and I'm going to set it to 25. And when I do that, we can see I don't have those little zones that were here and here anymore. It all blends in. And when I selected that circle on the layer, it's like it selected all the objects, and it's like I applied transparency to all those objects, but I didn't really do that. What I did is I applied that transparency to the layer itself. So watch what I mean by that, because if I come here and I select the circle again to sort of do all those things, a couple interesting things happen. First of all, we can see it still says opacity 25% there because that's what it is. And I could change it if I want to adjust it to a different percentage in that zone. But if I just select the object, one of these objects, notice it reads as 100% because the object itself wasn't changed. It was the layer. All right. Furthermore, if I just keep drawing on the layer, it will continue to make it that opacity. That's not a good spot for a shadow, but as I go to do the second floor, I will never have to worry about this. It's set at the layer level. All my shadows will come out as if they have this transparency to them. So it's a nice little trick when you're doing shadows to set the transparency at the layer level, not at the object level, for those two reasons. All right, so let's do the second floor. Well, I've already drawn this black object here because I copied it way at the beginning of this presentation. So all I need to go is back to Effect, to Transform, and I'm going to reset this to 25. Now here's another point in time where you could argue that there are certain different ways you could go about this. So you could say, well, now I'm up on a bigger floor, so my shadows should be taller. Go ahead and do that if you want to. I look at this drawing as more as a basic graphic technique. So just I think this just highlights the plan off the ground, and it's fine. But if you want to draw your shadows more as if you're sort of taller off the ground, go ahead and do that. Now I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to draw the chimney basically just like I did before, set the shadow just like I did before. And when I did this, I realized that I really missed the deck, because really I'd be seeing the deck in this location too with the shadow cast on it. But it's not going to be exactly this one, so we have to do a couple things here to make this work correctly. What I'm going to do is I'm going to come over here. I'm going to lock the shadow layer temporarily. I'm going to make a new layer in between ground and shadows and call it the deck layer. Again, and I'm going to just I'm going to use my eyedropper to eyedrop that deck color. And I'm actually going to use my rectangle tool up here on the deck to draw it here, because I don't have the lines on the second floor plan. Arguably I could go into CAD and reset it, but I don't have to. And then it's going to move it straight down so I know the deck is the same size. And if I hold shift, it'll sort of lock straight down in, and I can drop it. And I can put a little black stroke on it, even so. Again, instead of going to CAD, oops, I put a white stroke on it by accident. There we go, black stroke. And so I get the deck on here, and the shadows cast nicely on the deck here, is cast here. And you know what? I'm going to do the same thing for the roof, even though I called my layer deck. I'm just going to go ahead and draw a color in on this roof that we're seeing from below in this location, and the shadow can be cast right on that roof as it would be. And there's actually a roof over here as well. Now you could argue that I should be making these colors the same color as my elevation. We'll get into colors and matching everything in another assignment, so I'll just leave them as those for now. But the last thing is, these two roofs, they're up off the ground, and we're sort of not casting at that level, but this guy definitely feels like the shadow needs this little shadow like I have here. It's a little tricky to do, so really the best thing I would say to do that guy is come in here. I'm going to lock the layer. Actually, yeah, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to come to my shadow layer. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to make my object stroke nothing and fill black. And I'm just going to, I know what the shadow looks like. It's going to look like this guy. So I'm just going to trace out this shadow, since I've already done it on this plan, right to there, and I'm going to make my little 45 just like that. I don't need to worry about the pixelation of it. So I'll just come right around and draw the shadow. Then I'll just move it right down into place. Just like that. So now the deck casts a shadow, and yet it has a shadow cast on top of it, right? And then, you know what I really should do is I should actually I should add a shadow for this guy here, in which case we're going to see a little shadow here as well. And I probably should add a teensy bits of shadow for this guy as well. So I'm going to come in here. I can just add a black object here, here. Actually, this I can cheat. This can go here on my shadow layer just fine. And I can transform this and set this just like my normal shadows. The reality is, this layer that I put it on this deck layer, but this one can actually go up onto my light floor color layer because it has no shadow cast on it. So it will just cast a shadow as it should, just like that. All right. And then what I can do is I can come to this one, and this guy's going to cast a shadow at 45 degrees, and so I just might fake this one in just a little bit by going to my shadow layer, clicking a line here, and dragging up about 45 degrees like this through here. And of course I want the fill to be black and the stroke to be nothing. So I'll do that to cast that shadow just like that. Yeah, that's looking pretty good. So in these spots where the deck and this roof happen, where there are shadows need to be cast on it, and it needed to be cast a shadow, I had to I had to just basically draw out what the shadow looks like, which, by the way, we'll be doing a little bit more when we get to the elevation in the next video. But most of it was really easy to go, and quite honestly, this was a result of this house that had this. Many times I don't have to do those extra shadow steps. I just draw a box, I do the transform, and boom, I'm done. Alright, I'll see you for the elevation shadows shortly.